Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast. This week on the show, I am joined by Hal Herring to discuss the return of the public land grab movement and other conservation-related issues and threats that we're going to have to keep an eye on heading into the new year. All right, welcome back to the Wired to Hunt podcast, brought to you by First Light and their Camo for Conservation initiative. And today, we're continuing our series looking forward into 2025 and the new year. And the focus today is public lands and conservation related issues. We talked at the beginning of the year, kind of looking back on 24 and things that Tony and I have learned as we look towards planning our next year worth of projects. Last week, I think it was, we talked with Jake about planning and looking forward to a new year of habitat improvements. Now today, we're going to go a little bit bigger picture, looking across the nation at the issues that are going to potentially impact all of us who enjoy hunting and fishing on wild public places and also private land related places too. But today, unfortunately, we need to kind of turn back the clock to a set of issues that was talked a lot about here on the podcast, 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, and that being the land transfer movement, the public land grab movement, folks trying to get rid of our public lands, transfer them, sell them, degrade them, overutilize them for things that are not conducive to hunting and fishing and healthy wildlife populations and clean air and clean water, all that kind of good stuff. This is a set of topics that has to be discussed again. And my guest today is someone who's perfectly suited to do that. It's Hal Herring. Hal is the host of Backcountry and Hunters and Anglers podcast. He's also a longtime outdoor writer and journalist. He's covered the conservation and environment-related beats and kind of the intersection of those topics with hunting and fishing. He's covered that for decades, I believe. And he's actually now working on a book exploring some of these topics, in particular, the history of our public land. So Hal is a wealth of information, and he's someone who has been tracking the latest iteration of these public land threats. And I think that's one of the key things that we need to understand now, is that maybe for a minute, we felt like we'd won the battle. We'd kind of stopped this land transfer movement in its tracks. Back in 18, 19, 20, there was a decent bit of good news on the public land side of things. And over the last 4 years, there's been a lot more of that. Positive changes when it comes to management of our public lands, expanding public lands again, increasing protections on our public lands again. But it appears that new forces are ascending. New leaders, new influencers, new political think tanks and groups with different goals and different aims now are in a position to influence change for us in a not so good way. And we've started to see the beginnings of that. And one of those ways has been what Hal has described as the slickest land grab attempt yet, which was this lawsuit that the state of Utah recently filed back at the end of 2024, looking for the disposal, asking the Supreme Court for the disposal of 18.5 million acres of public lands in Utah. And then another 13, 14, maybe 15 other states signed on in support of that lawsuit. States like Idaho, Iowa, Wyoming, Alaska. These states were in support of this. So this is a new way. This is a new backdoor way to try to get folks hands on our public lands. And of course, as we've talked many times, we got to keep public lands in public hands. So our discussion today is going to be about what this latest land grab attempt means. And the good news on that front, which is that just a couple days ago, the lawsuit was struck down by the Supreme Court. So we're going to discuss what this lawsuit was about, why the Supreme Court shot it down, what that means for the future, what all of this might point towards over the coming year or years as far as how the public land grab movement might be shifting, and what we need to do as hunters and anglers and outdoors people to make sure that we are ready for this and ready for some new challenges coming down the pipeline, because it is now time to re-engage. We're going to discuss this. We're going to discuss why 2025 and the next few years, we as a hunting and fishing community are going to have to kind of get on it again. Maybe we've been sitting back on our laurels a bit recently, sitting pretty, feeling comfortable. No longer. We need to rally. We need to stand back up and get busy, because if we don't, we are once again faced with the very real threat of losing places we really care about. Places like the Boundary Waters, places like the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, places like the Tongass National Forest, places like the hundreds of millions of acres managed by the Bureau of Land Management across the American West. That's what we're discussing today. Hal is the perfect guy to discuss it with. I will give one quick soft plug. If this whole land transfer movement thing, if the history of how our public lands have been created and managed and now are under threat, if that's kind of new to you, if you haven't been following this story over the last decade with us here on Wired to Hunt, I got to plug my book. You can see it behind me if you're watching the video. It's called That Wild Country, an epic journey into the past, present, and future of America's public lands. That book was my attempt to try to get the average person up to speed on what's going on and do it in a fun, adventurous, compelling way. So there's a bunch of stories about my adventures on public lands, hunting and fishing and backpacking and rafting and doing all that kind of stuff. And along the way, I'm going to get you all up to speed on how we acquired 640 million acres of federal public lands, how we as Americans have access to these things, and the crazy story that led to that, as well as the debates and controversies and concerning threats that we will be facing here in the future to make sure we maintain that access in these incredible places for us to go out there and camp and hunt and fish and have a hell of a time. So check out That Wild Country. There are maybe autographed copies still on the MeatEater website. If not, go on over to Amazon, pick up a copy, and once you do that, tune into the rest of this podcast with Hal Herring. It's a good one. It's an important one. Thanks for being here. All right. Here with me now on the line is Mr. Hal Herring. Welcome back to the show, Hal.
Thanks for having me, man.
Man,
it's great to see you, Mark.
Yeah, I always appreciate you making time to do this. These are some of my favorite chats. And that's for a number of reasons. One, because you're just a wealth of information. And second, because you are someone who, from afar, gives me both hope and inspiration when it comes to the future of our wild places, public lands, wildlife. Through your podcast, through your words, you've done that for a lot of people, Hal. So I want to thank you here at the outset for doing that.
I appreciate that. I wasn't really trying to do that. That's how I feel. I've had it. If it comes through, it's just the way I've lived it. Like my life has been I've been so lucky, raised my kids and my family with the public lands and hunting and fishing, Missouri River, catfish, and and all the way back where I grew up in Alabama. It's like I've been lucky. So my passion for all this is kind of born in. And
yeah, it's hard to fake that when it's that deep in your bones and your history. And same for me. It's It's these things. They have given us so much. So much of our lives have revolved around these places, these pursuits, these critters.
Yep.
You can't help but want to make sure they're still around. Want to make sure that this pumper can keep on ticking, right?
Yeah, I feel like there is kind of, in my case, I've been so lucky with it. There is a quid pro quo.
Yeah.
And then being a reporter like Field and Stream, I got to deep dive into like some of the things that can go wrong and some of the things that have gone right, you know?
Yeah. And that's, I guess, why I wanted to have you back on here again. I wish we had good things. We maybe do have some good things to talk about, but I think the major impetus for giving you a ring again is the fact that the boogeyman of 6, 7, 8, 9 years ago that we were talking about with the public land transfer movement, the divestment of public lands, the idea of selling or transferring public lands that was getting really concerning in 2014, 15, 16, 17, somewhere in that window. We're starting to see that starting to rear its ugly head again. I think for a minute there, folks kind of felt like, all right, we've got it tamped down. We got this thing as a political poison pill. If you try to mess with our public lands, it's going to be political suicide for you, right? And in some of these recent years, we felt pretty good about things. But there have been some recent changes, some recent attempts, I think, that are maybe forcing us to open our eyes again to a new series of threats. And this lawsuit coming out of Utah is maybe the most glaring of those. And literally the day that we started the day that we're recording this, some big news has opened up on that front. Can you just give us a quick rundown of what this latest attempt to take our public lands was coming out of Utah, why that was so concerning, and then what happened today?
Sure. And we can all be thankful that we live in a country with you can argue with it however you want, but with a functioning Supreme Court of the United States. Anyway, we can argue about its composition and all that, but the court did rule. It's not for me or for you. The court ruled on the basis of the lawsuit. The lawsuit was the state of Utah filed a lawsuit against the United States federal government, our government, claiming that, and I'm not sure how they picked 18.5 million acres of BLM, Bureau of Land Management, managed public lands in Utah, had to be gotten rid of, had to be disposed of. They claimed that it was unconstitutional for the U.S. government to maintain control or management of those lands because they were unappropriated.
Yeah.
And to try to get that short but make it understandable is like people, if you know about the Homestead Acts, right? So the United States government gave away for a very small fee, starting in 1862, parcels of land to settle the West. We'd already given away huge amounts in the East, right? But in the West was opening up after the Civil War. And so those lands, they were unappropriated lands that were given to homesteaders. It's a great piece of history. It's one of the reasons the United States is the way it is. It was a Jeffersonian concept from the beginning. You know a lot about it, Mark, and but I'm just trying to boil it down. But yeah. So Utah, nobody wanted these desert rock lands in Utah at that time. And so they remained a part of the federal lands. And Utah is claiming that they are unappropriated, and so they have to be gotten rid of. Okay, so the problem with that, there's a lot of problems with the lawsuit, which the Supreme Court found quickly this morning, was that these lands are appropriated. They are federal public lands managed for multiple use for the American people.
By the Bureau of Land Management.
By the Bureau of Land Management in this case. The problem with the lawsuit was that if it had been successful, 13 other states signed on to this boondoggle. And that's a problem of the American culture wars right now, I can tell you, because the state of Alabama signed on to this. And I guess they figured that the unappropriated Bankhead National Forest, where some of the greatest public land in the Southeast, would also, they were going to get a hold of that. I don't know what they're planning, what the concept was. I think it was a culture war thing. We're all against the federal government. We better prove that by signing on to this nutball lawsuit.
Yeah, because by signing this amicus brief, as I understand it, that was nothing more than kind of ceremonial, right? I mean, their signing on to this would not in any way change the outcome of the lawsuit, right?
No, it would not. But it certainly threw a gauntlet down as to what these people believe about our public lands and hunting and public hunting and fishing in the Southeast.
And there was
we've got a big problem. the amicus brief with the additional signings shows us that we have a big problem in amongst conservation, hunting, and fishing and public lands users in the United States.
Basically 15 or 16 states with a government that is antagonistic towards our public lands.
Yes.
Was what that would show.
Well, with elected officials.
Yeah.
I would say, yeah, I mean, the government's whatever we make it. We vote for these dudes, fellows.
Yeah. Wyoming, Alaska, Iowa, Alabama, I think one or two of the Dakotas. There was a long list of them.
Yeah.
I think a whole lot of our listeners live in those states.
Yes.
And I think that's a clear sign that we've got some talking to do to our representatives.
We do. So the lawsuit was tossed out this morning, dismissed this morning by the Supreme Court with this enormous list of case law behind it, behind the dismissal, that this lawsuit is not valid, right? That those lands are appropriated, and they are appropriated by, that's not what the Supreme Court said. They just said the lawsuit wasn't valid. But the fact is that, you know, the origins, we were talking before we hit record, the origins of this were the anger from the off-road vehicle community. This is what I understand, at the Bureau of Land Management for closing down and trying to recover some places that had become very overused by,
and damaged, right?
Damaged totally. And like Labyrinth Canyon, and the Moab. I mean, if you've ever gone to the Rock Crawler Festival down there, you know, it's pretty big. It's huge. This is a huge industry.
I ended up down there once by accident at the same time as the Easter weekend Jeep festival or whatever. Yeah, it was wild. That's for sure.
It's wild. And I don't share in rock hopping and, you know, like Mad Maxing on the desert, right? But it's cool that other people do.
And that was, you know, one of my big takeaways while I was down there. And what makes federal management of our public lands so special is that we have this multiple use mandate on them.
Right.
That stipulates that this land is not just for the cattle grazers, not just for the rock climbers, not just for the deer hunters or the miners or the oil drillers or the loggers or the bird watchers. It's for all of us.
That's right.
And there has to be some compromise there to manage for that, right?
Yeah, nobody can get everything they want.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's just like living in a family or sharing a house with people. But what made me amazed about this was that the impetus for this lawsuit, and this, we talked about this, this is like with the Bundys and all those other folks too that were in the more ill-advised sagebrush rebel movement, was if they got what they said they wanted, they would be the ones that would be the first loss. They would have to pay to go rock hopping on the desert. And there would be huge places like when you think about the Amangiri Resort down there, just south of the Utah border in Arizona, where they charge, $3,800 a night. And they pick you up and fly you up in a helicopter to do sunrise yoga on the mesa. And they have little servants that come and bring you the dates or whatever and make sure that you're hydrated. And then
you're not going to those kinds of places.
Time, right? But that those people would be happy to buy another 30, 40, 50,000 acres of this. Of course they would.
And so that's the same worry that we had back in 2016 about the land transfer movement. Was basically if federal public lands go to states have a mandate to have a positive ROI on those state lands. They have to make money off of them. Right. And they simply would not be able to do that with this level of land and the management needed, the risk of wildfires and 1,000 other things that would just bankrupt a state,
right,
inevitably leading them to have to sell these lands, right? Isn't that still the case with this situation?
Yeah, that's for sure the case. I mean, Idaho did a full study of that, and they'd have to cut down every tree, all the timber immediately in order to pay off the management, costs. But this lawsuit was even more kind of wild because if you look at the PR campaign for it, it was Stand for Our Land or something, but the lawsuit actually said that the lands have to be disposed of, that the federal government couldn't hold them. This one didn't say they had to be transferred right to the states. So you're basically, a taxpayer in Utah was basically paying a PR firm and a law firm to carry a lawsuit to take away the very place they hike, hunt, or ride their rock crawler. This one was like, we're talking about the Overton window, the things that are acceptable. This one was throwing the Overton window over way off to left field.
And is that why I heard you say this on your podcast at one point, that this was maybe the slickest attempt yet that you've seen for stealing our public lands? And there's a little bit of, I think one thing I worry about is issue fatigue over this thing, right? We keep on talking
100%.
about challenges to public lands, the threats to our public lands, and folks have been hearing this for years and years and years now, and there's this worry that eventually folks will stop paying attention. But this one seemed like one that rose a lot more red flags than usual. Why was that? Why did this one stand out as so concerning and maybe portending something even more concerning in the future?
Well, because it was an incredible propaganda campaign. This one was better. I was coming back. We were working Bureau of Land Management sagebrush planting job in October. And we had one of them was in Colorado, and we came back through the Utah corridor, Wasatch corridor there, and I saw those giant signs with these like super nice looking people standing on them with their kids going, "Stand for our land." And I thought it was, did you see the billboards?
No, I've not.
They're very, very high end. And then it would say, go to standforourland.org. And then there would be a map of the United States, which was like completely red west of the Mississippi, like the federal government controls everything. And it was funny because they had even put all the Indian reservations on there. And it was a slick propaganda campaign, something like the Bundys and the old sagebrush rebel guys. They would have never done this. This was the governor of Utah and using the taxpayer money to create a slick propaganda campaign to divest the American people of some of the greatest red rock country in the world.
This idea, though, that they're putting out there, the federal government owns all your land. The big bad boogeyman bureaucrats in D.C. are making horrible decisions. We, the state, you, the people here close to these lands, you should be able to control these places. The state should be managing these places, etc. That at first glance might seem like an appealing message. Why? And one other thing I'll add is that we often hear and sometimes have seen real shortcomings with federal management sometimes of our lands, right? It's not always perfect.
Yeah.
There's a lot of challenges.
Yeah.
There's a lot of issues, right? So it's not perfect over there. So people love to complain about federal management of everything, but in this case, public lands.
Sure.
Why? I guess what would you say to someone with that set of critiques? Why is federal management actually a good thing to continue? And why is it that this alluring idea of local control, why is that a little bit of snake oil?
Well, because you have way more input into federally controlled public lands, federally managed public lands, than you ever will under SITLA. If you look at this, that SITLA is the State Land Board of Utah.
Yep.
And they've been selling off state lands at a great clip. Now, the state transfer movement will tell you right away that we're not letting, these aren't school trust lands. We're taking over huge sections of federally managed public lands, and we're not going to make them school trust lands. So we can do whatever we want with them. But the fact is what do they want to do? Do you think you would have more local control over SITLA lands? You can't even camp on state lands in Colorado without permission, if I understand that right. Montana fought a huge lawsuit in the 1980s over public access to state land sections. I mean, it's just, let me tell you, I think there is a lot of mismanagement of every kind in America all the time.
Sure.
And in Sudan and in Brazil and in Finland, right? Human beings do good things and they do bad things. And federal management of public lands is always in conflict, and it should be. If you and I inherit a great big mansion with our 12 siblings, we're going to argue over whether the bathroom fixtures ought to be gold, how steep the steps ought to be when grandma comes. We're going to argue over that, and we're going to make mistakes. And somebody's going to paint the living room, purple, and you're going to be furious about that. But that doesn't mean that you give the mansion away to some dude from Norway and everybody in the family live out on the streets looking back at the mansion going like, oh man, remember when I had that bedroom upstairs and we played chess? And
wasn't that nice?
Wasn't it great?
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm a big fan. One, I think that if we look at public land management since 1891, when we had the first Forest Reserve signed by President Harrison, you will find missteps and you will find all kinds of things. You will find mostly good people working very hard to try to do the right thing as they understand it at that time. And you will see one of the greatest success stories that Aldo Leopold would approve of 70%, right? 60% even. Aldo Leopold, the great conservation thinker of his time, who worked for the Soil Conservation Service during the Dust Bowl and was the proponent of the first wilderness area, he would approve about 60%, right? And dude, when you have this wonderful thing, you got to argue over the management, and that's what we do. And this is good. It's good to argue over it. It's good for the OHV people to say, BLM is stepping on my toes. I want to do this. I want to do that. And people argue over that. And they go out and look at Labyrinth Canyon and they look at the places and they say, this is too much impact for me. And then somebody else goes, ain't no impact here. This is wonderful. I love this. Shooting on public lands is always going to be a big issue going forward, of course. You take your refrigerator out there, you blow it up with the AK, and you drive off. And somebody else goes like, oh my God, look at this horrible thing, right? And so you can't really do that if you want to keep on acting that way.
Yeah.
So it's not just compromise either. It's bringing people. This is the great unifier. The United States public land unifies right, left, Republican, Democrat, independent. This is the last of the great commons in this country.
And I think a key thing to remember is, despite the fact that we can point to plenty of things that aren't just right, or plenty of things that we personally aren't quite happy with, we are the envy of the world in many cases with what we have, with this imperfect yet still really damn good system to carefully manage these lands as best as possible for the greatest number of people with this multiple use mandate. We have built in a set of, people hate bureaucracy, but sometimes when you have something as precious as this public land estate, we should have a lot of guardrails in place. We should have a lot of process in place. We should have a lot of public input opportunities. But yeah, it slows things down sometimes. Yes, it causes some speed bumps and challenges, but it's that important. If the states had this, none of that's there.
No. And people, the 1970s were the environmental decade, when we set a lot of that federal policy and law in place.
Yep.
FLIPMA, for instance, in 1976. The NEPA process, the National Environmental Policy Act, was that 76, I think?
Somewhere in that ballpark.
Yeah, and these are onerous, and they're difficult to deal with. And sometimes we'll go back and look at them and say, do we need this? And that's the beauty of having the mansion, having the land. We can figure out, and we'll make mistakes. And if the bureaucracy has gotten so overwhelming and bloated that it's not working for public land management anymore, we have the voting power, we have the citizen power to change that.
Well, I think a great example of that was 2019, 2020, whenever that was, when as we moved through this land transfer movement, we as a collective outdoor collection of communities, hunters and anglers and climbers and mountain bikers and outdoor enthusiasts of all stripes, really stood up and rallied around public lands and said, hey, this is not okay to transfer these to states. This is not okay to dispose of them. And it got to a point where to get reelected in 2020 as a senator, several Republican senators had to really make strong stands on public lands and get the president at the time to sign, for example, the Great American Outdoors Act into law, things that would show a win on the public land side of things to help get the support of hunters and anglers and other people who care about these things. We were able to make it a political necessity. We were able to influence change. And that was just, for me, a very encouraging sign that when we come together on some of these things, we can steer the ship.
That's right. And I mean, I envision a day when it's never going to stop people trying to get a hold of the Utah public lands when somebody will buy them, or, and there's money to be made off of getting rid of our public lands. I mean, you can imagine what somebody would pay for the Talladega National Forest in Alabama, for instance. Like it would be a lot.
Yeah.
So you have to choose, the people have to choose to keep this institution that we've inherited. You got to choose. You got to choose and it's kind of like being on a personal level of self-discipline. You got to choose every day. Today I'm going to work hard. I'm going to get up early. I'm going to get to work. I'm going to make my things happen. You got to choose this every day, because the world, if you just let this slide, you'll lose the public lands. It's just, they're too valuable.
Well, and the thing about
people,
it's an unfortunate imbalance. We have to show up for every single fight, and we've got to win as many of them as we can. And even if we win one of these fights, like you just said, there's going to be another one next month or next year, 5 years down the road, or 50 years down the road. These will continue over and over and over again.
Right.
On the flip side, if we lose one of these battles, we lose some piece of land or some classification of land, whatever it is. You lose one of these battles, you lose these places forever in many cases. So it's something we can't take lightly.
No, and for one of the dangers of living in a functioning country is that you become incredibly complacent. I mean, it's like I often ask people to imagine what the United States would be like. Say you're raising your grandchildren in a place where the public lands have been, that whole idea has been lost. And maybe you kept the national parks where you can go if you can't take your dog, you gotta obey all the rules because everybody's there. You can't go out on the BLM lands and walk for a week. You can't go out in the Missouri breaks of Montana and go elk hunting without paying or getting permission. You can't float the Missouri River and camp. I just ask people, you can't go to the Sipsey Wilderness in Alabama or the Bienville National Forest in Mississippi and just go down to the creek with the kids. You got to either pay or you got to own it. I ask people all the time, what would your country, how would that affect you? Well, for a growing number of people, Mark, they don't care. They don't go outside. They're on their Game Boys or whatever you call it. And, and they don't care. But for us, for the people who know, and the people who know what our country, the beauty of our country, American dirt, right? American water, American mountains. This is how you get to experience this. This is where the rich and the poor, they all get the same. This is America, man, to me. And that's not just to me.
Yeah. And, I think there's a lot of different parts of our American society, government, political system that feel very out of our hands, that feel out of our control, that feel so far above us and
That's what they want you to think.
Well, yes, yes, that is true. But my point being, I personally don't feel like I have much influence over or could really change something when it comes to, let's say, artificial intelligence policy and how that's going to impact the future of our government and defense system and privacy matters, let's say. But public lands and wildlife, actually, we have some pretty strong, tangible means to influence decisions there. There are systems in place, and it's still huge, but it's still relatively approachable enough that our voices actually matter. There are clear, simple things we can do that can help. Like, we can change this. This is a part of our country that we should not feel nihilistic about, because we actually can change the narrative.
100%, and we have since 1891.
Right.
So
many examples.
For this podcast, I was looked up. They had this guy, I think it was in the 20s. The Weeks Act had been passed in 1911, which allowed the federal government to buy like logged out and abandoned lands in the East. Right.
Yep.
They wanted their own national forests, and they had this guy, Uncle Joe Cannon. He was a senator from Illinois. And every time anybody brought up in Congress that, to purchase like the Apalachicola National Forest, he would say, "Not 1 cent for scenery." And he would yell this same thing over and over, right? And so we have had Uncle Joe Cannon with us since 1891 at least. We had him with the robber barons in Montana, who said, "Those who follow us can damn well take care of themselves." And then like drink some kind of like super good liquor,
Right.
And while making fun of all the people like working in the mine. But we've had these people forever. And I think of Uncle Joe Cannon, they still set up the Bankhead National Forest in Alabama, Appalachian in Florida, the White Mountains National Forest. He was yelling, "Not 1 cent for scenery," while the rest of us were getting all this beautiful stuff done, right?
Yeah.
So what's happened more recently that I really want to see changed is that we have thrown public lands and conservation and clean water and the future of our hunting and fishing in a culture war basket where somehow it landed on the left side, when it couldn't be no more. The most destructive environmental regimes on earth have been communists, have been leftists. True. And like Pinochet in Chile was a right winger, and he was pretty bad, right? He sold their rivers. But the trick was authoritarian regimes on right or left have been terrible for people's freedom and for the environment. But we have got to get conservation in the public lands out of the culture wars basket. And it's not in there for me. It's not in there for you, but we've got to get them out. And we've got to bring them in front of the two political parties and say, "This is what we're going to do, buddy. Little feller. We're keeping the National Forest and the Bureau of Land Management lands. We're keeping all of our public lands and our national wildlife refuges, which are unbelievable crown jewels. We're keeping all that stuff. We're going to have clean water to fish in and drink, and big, strong, healthy kids raised on big, clean air, because this is America." And now you can argue over how to achieve that, boys and girls in Congress. But that goal is one that is going to be outside of your political like grooviness, whatever it is you're doing with the big signs where you're taking the taxpayer money and making big signs in Utah.
Yeah, and
with that action.
And rather than this being an argument over, is this a goal that one party is going to pursue and one's not, how about we argue over the solutions rather than like doesn't matter? Because it matters. We have to make it known to both parties that this matters to us. And then let's get the right side and the left side to then debate and argue and butt heads over the right ways to get there. But when it's all on one side, we're in trouble.
We're in trouble. And it's not. I mean, I just don't think. Well, I know people who know, if you fish or hunt particularly, You know that you can't do that without clean water and public lands and public access. I mean, it's not like some kind of theory. It's not abstract.
Nope.
And the other problem is we inherited this. I'm older than you are, but you and I have come up in a time where we had these things based on the work and hard fought battles of our forebears. I mean, the same kind of way we fought King George.
Sure.
Like, we got this. We don't really have the right to go like, it's just too much. You know, like Beavis and Butthead, that thing where they were going to save the people in the burning airplane, but they couldn't get the door open. And Beavis says, this is too hard. And the other guy goes, yeah, something's hard. It's not worth doing. And they just leave and the plane like blows up. It's like we inherited something wonderful.
Yeah.
And we just, it ain't going to go on my watch.
No. So I'm happy that our conversation today is one that has some good news, which is that this lawsuit that was so concerning for a lot of people has been thrown out. So that battle was won. We got, that gopher was knocked on the head.
Yeah, that gopher. There's many other gophers coming.
Yeah, so more gophers coming, right? It seems like this is a sign of more to come. Can you elaborate a little bit on what you think might be coming next, or what we need to be keeping an eye out? Because it seems like this is not an anomaly, right? Right.
So the problem with politics in the United States right now is that it's become oversimplified, and that's true in this public land. The public land thing should not be a political issue, but it is. So what I think is coming is that we are going to see more and more defunding of the agencies that manage these lands. I know that the wildlife refuges are kind of in funding crisis now, and you're going to see more and more. There's actually a strategy here that's been going on since the 70s, 80s, where it's called defund and decry. So Congress doesn't allocate the money to the say the U.S. Forest Service, or the Forest Service has to spend all its money on fires and it doesn't get any more. And then there's no trail work done. And then there's no creek restoration work done. There's no logging cleanup done. And people go like, the campground isn't clean enough. And people go, this is ridiculous. I didn't bring my family out here to look at a turned over outhouse. And then then somebody goes, what would really be good is if they didn't have this Forest Service stuff anyway, because they're not doing the job, are they? Mm-hmm. So, and that's that I see that coming big time. And I see overcrowding of public lands. I thought it was going to bring more constituents in to celebrate public lands. But in places overcrowding on public lands, like during the COVID year or whatever that was, people are going, man, this is awful. There's too many people. And so I see that. People, the ones who want to divest us of the public lands, they're going to be working the budgets down, and they're going to be pointing out every instance of mismanagement, and then going, wouldn't it be good if you didn't even have this mansion?
Yeah.
Well,
like you said, politics has unfortunately gotten, I guess I don't know how to describe it, but politics are tribal. They raise a lot of emotions. That you get these team kind of ideas where if you identify as a Republican or identify as a Democrat, you feel like you have to take everything in that bucket, right?
Right.
But if you were to look at the administration coming in here next week, and set everything else aside, everything else that they're doing good, every decision that we might be in support of, and if you look simply at what happened last time around when it comes to public lands, there are a series of trends which I think fall in line with what you just said. I mean, for example, last time, the guy put in charge of the Bureau of Land Management was one of the most prominent folks speaking out against public lands, speaking out about disposing of public lands. That guy was put in charge of the public lands last time.
Right.
The playbook was written by this guy again for the upcoming administration on how to get rid of public lands, how to, like you said, defund, decry, etc. There was this death of 1,000 cuts that was taking place over the course of that 4 years, where you saw many of our national monuments significantly reduced in size, like Bears Ears, where I know you spent a bunch of time recently, Escalante. You saw some very special places. There's been a lot of conversation around whether they're the right place for really risky mining projects, things like, the Boundary Waters area, where that was opened up possibly for leases. And then most recently that was a moratorium was put in place, but there we might see that open up again. Drilling in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, an incredible, iconic landscape of America, has been debated for many decades on whether or not that should be opened up for drilling. Never was opened up until this last administration. The roadless rule, something that's protected these last roadless areas across our national forests, that was rescinded in areas such as the Tongass National Forest. So there's all of these different examples where public lands and healthy wild places were kind of slashed away at, picked away at, defunded, etc. Everything else aside, in this one arena, there's a lot of sign for concern based on what happened last time around.
Yes.
Do you expect that to continue as it was? Do you think it's going to accelerate, given the fact that there's not a second time round they're shooting for? This is it. Do you have any other thoughts, predictions on as far as what we need to be keeping tabs on, prepared to fight back on, anything like that?
I do. So one, the last one, 2016 through, we saw the rescinding of the monuments in Utah, right? So there was a weird quid pro quo there where Utah kind of delivered for President Trump, and so they got these things in return.
Yeah.
And that's a big can of worms. It's really interesting. I think people that are listening to this should be looking at that. Like, you deliver so X number, the majority of the vote, and you'll get this. Did the American people want the reduction of Bears Ears or Grand Staircase Escalante? They did not. And they said that repeatedly, but they got that. That's what happened to us anyway. So in a sense, that was a quid pro quo to the Utah. So I think that's really repulsive. And I don't think that the American people are going to accept that. But like the appointment of William Parker Pendley as head of the BLM, who is this fossil from the early Reagan years, who was so scandal ridden even then as a young man that he went out with James Watt back in those days, right? But so there was this fossil there that they found because they were, as President Trump said the first time, we were highly unprepared to win. We were really not prepared. We didn't understand so much of what we wanted to do during those 4 years, whether you agree with that or not, right? So on this administration, this time, as my wife said this the other day, the American people voted to kick over the apple cart for a lot of different reasons.
Yeah.
And a lot of apples have spilled out. And we're going to determine now, this is way different than the first administration, although it's similar in that it is radically pro-business. Okay. So if you can make money mining right outside the boundary waters, that's going to be on the table. And the American people will be asked to engage deeply to say, we're pro-business as well. We understand these things. To have a multinational global company come and put in jeopardy the boundary waters is not our idea of good business. We're not going to do that. Okay. Ambler Road in Alaska.
Yeah.
Probably not good business to open that up. Again, I would ask anybody to listen to the podcast I did with John Leshy about the 1872 mining law. We're talking about expanding mining on public lands in the United States, east and west, under a law written in 1872 to encourage a guy with a pickaxe and a burrow to go grab public land and make it his own and dig a hole and find something that we needed. That law has to be reformed, repealed, rescinded before we can do mining in America in a sensible fashion, a good business. So the fact that law is not on the table here, that's very concerning. people should be working on that now. The American people should demand that American minerals are used by American companies to produce American jobs and American resources. All right. So there's going to be a radical pro-business emphasis in the Trump administration. Okay. But I myself am not afraid. I think that we should be wary, and we should say that's good business and that's not good business. And we will stand for this and we will not stand for this. And we're going to be able to do that. And for instance, the government efficiency or whatever, the department of whatever that extraneous extracurricular thing is. All right, we could use that. Mark, we could use that. We could use that in public lands management. How do we make public lands management better, more efficient? How do we get local communities employed thinning timber in the Tongass? How do we get local communities employed restoring creeks in the Bitterroot after those fires, right? Because we are not doing that right now. And it's not good.
Doesn't that come back, though, to the budget issues? So much of it?
Well, it depends on prioritization of the budget. I noticed that we have lots of budget for certain things that I don't particularly think are healthy.
Okay.
I'm saying, like, the American people are going to have to say, you know, creek restoration on public lands is a priority for me. And you can do whatever you want with this money, but we would like to see it allocated in this way more efficiently as well. You know, I'm not sure that building new RV parks is really a great use of the money, for instance.
Yeah.
When you have areas where you could fence off riparian places and create incredible fisheries and clean water downstream. When you have just all of this work that we could be doing. So I'm not afraid of this. I may turn out to be a Pollyanna or overly optimistic, but I believe that when the American people decided to upset the apple cart here, that it doesn't mean that we want filthier water and no public lands and all of us to have all our rare earth materials stolen by some company from Chile.
Would you say, though, given what seems to be a pretty clear, as you said, pro-business emphasis for the next 4 years, very pro-business, if we were to grow complacent and bury our heads in our phones and our Netflix shows or just being out in the woods by ourselves hunting and fishing and just doing our own thing, if we were to do that and not engage with what's going to come up in the next 4 years with this radical, very pro-business agenda, would it be fair to say that we could expect to see a lot of these special places endangered if we don't make sure we're in it?
100%. And not only that, but they're the powers that want to take over public lands and like sell them to their wealthy friends are ascendant right now.
Yeah.
I mean, we have probably the most billionaires making policy that we've ever had, and the fewest like normal people. So you're going to have to counter that. But there's 340 something million Americans. I have a quote that I always use. And it's perfect for this thing. The struggle may be a moral one, or it may be a physical one, and it may be both moral and physical, but there will be a struggle. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will. Find out just what any people will quietly submit to, and you have found out the exact measure of injustice and wrong which will be imposed upon them. And these will continue until they are resisted with words or blows or both. The limits of tyrants are prescribed by the endurance of those whom they oppress. That was Frederick Douglass talking about slavery in the South.
Wow.
So that's what I think. If you are not willing to stand up, or if you're watching and running on the treadmill at the gym watching Fox News, they're making you think there's only two kinds of Americans, and they hate each other and they won't ever agree on anything. And I don't know why the other side does it too, I guess. But I don't know what motive we have for dividing the American people. But if we remain this divided, we'll lose the public lands and the conservation that supports hunting and fishing. We shouldn't be divided over that.
We have talked about various permutations of this issue, at least over the last decade, you and I know you've talked about many, many other people over many decades. So now in 2025, we're a quarter of the way through this new millennia, I guess it'd be, century. What can we do now? What are the most positive, productive means for not just enduring what might be coming, but also influencing in a positive way? What's the battle cry? What's the game plan here over these coming years?
I think we're going to have to. So the energy is on the right wing at the moment. And we, as conservatives, or whatever political label you want to put on most hunters and fishermen, are going to have to get through to the elected people, the people we vote for, that these things are priorities and that they will not be thrown in some basket of culture war topics. That the wildlife refuge system is so wonderful. Like, it is such a crown jewel of America. The national forests are so important to us, as Americans, our identity, our freedom. Okay, these are not political footballs. And so we're going to have to get through into this pro-business community that there are certain things we will not accept. This is another topic, but we have huge success stories all the way back to 1891 on conservation in America, and the extirpation of the bison, the loss of almost all the waterfowl, so we had these huge failures and these enormous successes, and we're doing both right now again. But we're failing with clean water throughout the Midwest, really failing. And we let the Clean Water Act be trimmed back to its original definition in 1972, to the point where we're failing to protect the clean water that supports fishing and swimming and all that. So we have these huge failures, and the folks that we just elected are not the ideal people to address that. Let's say that. I'm going to be very objective here. The folks that we just elected, Donald Trump, for instance, will tell you that he doesn't know anything about that. That's what he told the Farm Bureau when they rescinded the Waters of the U.S. rule last time. He said, I don't even know what it is, but it's terrible. And you folks told me that we don't want it. And so I'm getting rid of it. He said the same thing about the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. He said, nobody cares about this. It's open. Right. So obviously people didn't speak up and say that's not true. We do care about it. And you may not support the Waters of the U.S. rule, but I'll bet you don't support drinking blue-green algae in Des Moines. Mm-hmm. So these folks, I see this as an opportunity, Mark. Totally. I don't think somebody like Elon Musk is so focused on Mars or Venus or whatever that planet they want to go to, which is fine with me. I'm like, have at it, man. Build some cool rockets, Like, I like smart people.
Sure.
Right? But here's the thing. A guy who's spending a lot of time thinking about Mars and stuff, he's probably not thinking about the water fishing in Des Moines.
Yes.
Or in Sioux Falls. And that's our business. And that's what we know. And so, but I would say this, I doubt that President Trump or Elon Musk or Vivek Ramaswamy, I bet none of them actually are going like, you know what I really want to do is get rid of the Talladega National Forest.
Right.
You know what I bet I'd like to do? I'd like to pollute Mobile Bay so nobody can fish in it or have a nice house on it. They're not doing that. And these are J.D. Vance, for instance, went to Yale, whatever. The guy has some education. He's not going to say that clean water is not important. So it's up to us now to put some apples back in this apple cart and say, this apple's really important. Don't let that one go down the hill. And I honestly think that we're in a place where we could effect positive change in the United States right now that, to me, we've been a little too complacent to do. We've kind of rested on the laurels of the 1970s and the Wilderness Act of 64 and the Dust Bowl stuff. That's what I think. I'm pretty excited, actually. I think it's a very dangerous time for all the reasons you mentioned. And I think that times of danger kind of make me feel better.
So what are some specific tactics or actions that we as individuals can take to help make sure that we grab this apple, put it back in the cart, and say, hey, folks, this one's really important. Do not screw this one up. Give this one some tender love and care. Listen to us. How do we actually do that, Hal? Because it's an idea and it's a sentiment that makes a lot of sense, but I think a lot of folks then still wonder, like, well, what does that mean to my daily life? Or what does that mean for me this week? Or how do I, as an individual in Des Moines, Iowa, actually do that?
Well, I've decided, and I do handle the podcast for backcountry hunters and anglers, so maybe I have a conflict of interest there, but I decided in the last 10 years, I've been writing this book for 5, and a lot of the research was on how did you get the Clean Water Act passed, and one, as an individual, read books and listen to podcasts and really concentrate on what it is that you think is important in life. This is kind of like what this is. I wrote a piece for Field and Stream years ago, and it was in response to unfettered energy development on the Roan Plateau, which I went to see, and I thought, this is not good, right? We can get the energy without doing this, right? And I wrote a piece called "What Do You Really Believe In?" And so, number one, I'm going to answer this as quickly as I can. What do I really believe in? Like clean water and having kids swimming and catching crawdads in a creek that doesn't poison them. Having public lands where I can go, like a person can go hunting for a week or even a day, or you could just take a 6-pack of beer out and sit on the river, right? So I think that hunters and fishermen are listening to your podcast are going to say, I do believe in these things. I believe in them strongly. And the second thing, which it took me a while because I'm kind of highly individualistic, was that old Hemingway thing from To Have and Have Not, where the guy says, a man alone just ain't got no chance. And the truth is Trout Unlimited, Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, Isaac Walton League, Ducks Unlimited to the max is probably the greatest wetlands conservation group in the world. They all have problems. They're run by human beings, and human beings are fallible.
Yes.
But Americans in large teams have really driven the positive change that we're talking about. And that I don't hate to say it. It took me a long time to get to this. Is you got to join with like-minded brothers and sisters, and those numbers equate to a politician going like, sending the staff, we got to meet these folks. Sorry. I don't want to hear about clean water in Iowa, but there's like 25,000 people who might not vote for me next time. And then one of the old-time politicians, I think a guy told me this once in D.C. He said, yeah, it's a good idea. Now make me do it.
That's our task.
That's it. And it's tough because we used to be sportsmen, like in the 1930s. They had all of these local sportsmen's groups, and Montana was full of them. I don't know about where you grew up, if it was or not, but Montana was full of them. Or Valley County Sportsmen, great prickly pear sportsmen, Hellgate hunters and anglers in Missoula. And they were incredibly politically active on a statewide and local level. And they got older and older. I would go to the meetings, and everybody got older and older. And then they just they're still around, some of them, but they've waned in power. And so I would like to see that again, but I don't think we're going to see that because people are so busy, man. Like you got little kids. My kids are grown, and I'm still like college tuition. Oh, and everybody's busy. But you're not too busy really to join like backcountry hunters and anglers or Trout Unlimited or something.
Yeah.
And thereby amplify your voice, multiply your voice. That's my answer, I guess.
Yeah.
What is the public lands equivalent to that? Like National Forest Foundation?
Yeah. I mean, like you said, BHA is about as good of a modern day version of those sportsmen's clubs too, right? With pint nights and things like that. Like that's the best example I've seen of the younger crowd activating as a community. And
so I would add this to, and you've done some of this. I've done some of it, but I would like to do more. Volunteering with these BHA things and meeting people of like mind.
Yep.
I got to tell you, I was feeling very beat down the other day, and I was working on a chapter in my book which involved Alabama, and I called a young guy there who's a biologist and a fanatical hunting and fishing guy, and he was on his way to waterfowl hunting up in North Alabama, and it happened to be at a place that I went to in high school, and we got it on Google Earth and we looked at it, and I felt better for 3 days after just talking with Joe Jenkins.
That's
and
great.
His enthusiasm for going hunting down there. And I realized that there's all these people who love the same things I do and are really motivated to fight for them. And that you meet those, it's like those fence removal things they had in Colorado and in eastern Montana, wetlands restoration, planting projects. It's we gotta seek out people of like mind and begin to form tribe.
You get that snowball rolling. And those little local volunteer efforts might not save the world today, but those are those start points. And like you said, you bring community together, you establish new connections, you build energy off of each other, you gain like your tank gets refueled by being around other like-minded people. So such stories. A great example.
Stories. And I just thought, like, if I were really young now, I'd be volunteering on a lot of those to try to find people of like mind, man.
That was such a great, I've done 10 of those over the last 24 months or so for the Working for Wildlife tour. And that was my biggest takeaway from that, was just the power of bringing these people together that all care about this stuff. And so many signs of hope just by being around each other and hearing stories and doing something actual, tangible, positive right here and now. You're making a positive difference right now. You are regaining agency. We talked earlier about how so much feels outside of our control. But when you're out there on the ground planting a tree alongside another guy or girl who also loves hunting or fishing or the outdoors, you can't help but feel a little bit better. And you can't help but be inspired to do a little bit better the next time, too.
I mean, that's how we've been doing it since caveman days, right?
Yeah.
Like, get that mammoth. And then think how happy everybody was when you got the mammoth. And, like, you're clapping them on the back. You might hate this guy, when you're not hunting. But you're going like, man, what a good shot with that atlatl, right?
Yeah.
Like, this is community. And the ladies are all happy. They're, like, hauling the meat back. And it's like, this is community. This is tribe. It's something in us that's as old as human beings, right?
Yeah.
And I was following y'all when you were doing that. We were actually, and see, I've been doing this big planting job, but that's a paid job with the Mule Deer Foundation. It's a beautiful job, but it's not the same. Everybody's there to, it's work. Everybody's there with a huge goal, but it's work. And those volunteer things, we rolled fence. And dude, it was so, I know you've been doing this, but it is actionable, quantifiable,
Yep.
right? There was hair and dead mule deer at this crossing, and that fence was completely useless. It was just left there from after a forest fire like 20 years ago. And we rolled that fence right out of that mule deer trail that came from the high country to the winter range.
You did it.
Yeah, observable, actionable, quantifiable.
It's powerful.
That's what I kept asking people, like with the climate change stuff and all that I got so disengaged from, because I was like, I just need to see something actionable, quantifiable, and observable. And that's, planting, restoring wetlands, restoring grassland, planting trees, burning, fuels reduction.
Yep.
I was like, I want an actionable, quantifiable, observable. And those volunteer projects are all of that.
Yeah. Yeah. Such a great example.
Yeah.
So I was going to ask you a question, which you just already answered mostly, but I will give you an opportunity to add anything else to it. The question being, one of the first things you said that we should do entering this era is to get educated, right? To pay attention to this stuff. And so I think this is something I've brought up to you maybe every time we've talked, some version of this, but there's the famous Leopold quote, the curse of an ecological education is discovering that you live in a world of wounds. Something along those lines, he said. Basically, the more we educate ourselves on these issues, the more we pay attention to the news about the environment and public lands and wildlife, the more you're going to realize there's a lot of stuff endangered. There's a lot of stuff getting, there's a lot of stuff that's not doing great.
Right.
So what I'm always looking for are ways to maintain hope, ways not to feel like, man, this whole thing's going to the shitter eventually.
Yeah.
You mentioned a couple great examples, ways to do that. Getting involved with community, volunteering. You mentioned just talking to someone who's going out hunting and being reinvigorated through that. Do you have any other things in your life that help you stay positive? Because sometimes when you zoom out and you look at the long-term trajectory of our natural world and the environment and clean air and wildlife across the world and all that kind of stuff, it can get a little dark and dreary. How do you stay hopeful?
Boy, I hope you don't edit this. You may have to edit this out. So all species go through population overshoots, and not all of them, but most. And they fill up their ecological niche, and then they decline in numbers. They don't go extinct. It's not like apocalypse and fire and that, right? So, human population on our planet is supposed to peak at like 9.8, 10 billion, maybe 12, I'm not sure, but it peaks in about 250 years, much less probably. And at that point, the children, our great-great-grandchildren are going to be living in a world that is recovering from all of the things that people did to get insatiable resource demand, right? So here's my point. And I call this carrying the fire. Those of us who understand how powerful the rivers and the forests and the wildlife are have a unique moment in history. What we prioritize, conserve, protect, steward now is what's going to be in that recovering world in 150 years. And so there has never been a time where it was more important to teach your children to hunt and shoot and how beautiful it is to hunt squirrels and to take like food from the land and fish from the water and know that water is clean enough that it's going to make you strong and healthy so you can run the 100-yard dash tomorrow. This is physicality too, like to teach children and to keep ourselves fit, right? To be powerful and strong, and to teach our children like health and connections to nature, because this is the fire that we're going to carry through what this population overshoot into a future where maybe there's 1 billion people on Earth, and there are incredible numbers of wildlife and fish and oceans pouring around without big plastic garbage patches and stuff, right? But right now is the moment. And I think about that, and I think about Doug Tallamy's Homegrown National Park stuff, where
Yep.
they're saying, man, you don't have to have 20 acres. You can plant a pollinator belt of native plants in your yard. And those pollinators are going to thrive in that place. Like my own backyard garden has so much diversity in it now of these insects that I've just never seen before. And it's kind of like, it's not very big, and they came from somewhere. And they came there because I planted these native pollinators.
Yeah.
And it's a microcosm, but what is the macrocosm except for these made up of these small things?
Yep.
So I'm actually, and it's my bias, right? Like, I already wanted to teach my kid how to pike fish. And my daughter is a fisherman and a hunter, and my son is a hunter and a fisherman, and they know the power of these things because my wife and I taught it to them. But they're carrying this fire, and they're young. They're not like in big conservation groups going to DC advocating for that. That's our business, right? But they know where the bread's buttered. They know what's powerful.
Yeah.
And it's our business to carry that fire through this time. And so that making sure that it goes on.
It's a hell of an obligation, but
when
we're awfully fortunate to be able to do it. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a beautiful obligation because for me, it involves doing what I already want to do.
Yeah. True. There's a lot worth fighting for still. That's for sure.
Oh my, so much. There is so much left not left. There's just so much there. Like, I mean, I live near the Lewis and Clark National Forest. And I don't know where you're at on this, but like this morning I was going to the dump, and it's called the wolf moon. This January moon. And I don't know if it's an optical illusion or not, but it was like 5 feet. It was the biggest moon I've ever seen going down over the mountains.
Wow.
And I thought just how lucky I was, one, to have the Bob Marshall Wilderness out there west of my house, and two, to see this moon, and had gotten up, before it got light. So I got to see this. And it was a thing where I just felt lucky, and to whom much is given, much is expected, I think.
Yep. So true. And perfect sentiments to kind of send us out here. Can you tell us, Hal, you've alluded to this book project you've been working on for a few years now. Are you at a point you can tell us anything about that yet? Can you tease it? Can you give us anything as far as what to look forward to or when to look forward to it?
Yeah, I'm going to finish this year. I don't know that. I guess it'll be out next year. But it's a public lands book, and it's a lot of it is profiles of trips like on national forests, and part of it. I mean, I read your book early, and you and I, how many years ago was that we talked about these projects?
Well,
like 7.
Yeah, something like that. Because my book came out at the end of 2019.
Right.
So
I think 7 years ago, you told me, I said, well, I got this contract. I'm working on this book. And you're like, I'm working on one too. And you'd been at it for a couple of years.
Yeah.
But and your book is also experiential. You and I were talking about this before you hit the record. I wanted to do it did turn out to be brief, but a history of how we got public lands and an understanding of all the issues regarding that. But I wanted the second part of the book to be journeys, just trips. And so I've done some incredible trips. Mostly I've sat here, as you know, as a writer, sat here like a limpet glued to this chair.
Yeah.
But it's like places like the Tuskegee National Forest in Alabama. It's kind of a deep dive into the history and what's there, and based around a trip there on the Bartram Trail. Which, if anybody's listening to this, go like as the winter gets towards spring, man, go look at the Bartram Trail. And that's James Bartram, the naturalist who went to the Creek Nation back in 1790s, I think, and recorded all the plants and all the stuff he saw. It was William Bartram. And he he wrote a book called The Travels of William Bartram, which people should read. Like, this is like, and that's Alabama. There's another one, Apalachicola Forest, where you go through the Bradwell Bay Wilderness, which is like the strangest, like it's water up to your waist for miles and miles. Shoshone National Forest, first national forest in America, right, was the Yellowstone Timberland Reserve, the
Amazing
very
place.
first national forest. We do about a 40-mile trip through that.
Nice.
So that's where I've been, man, for all the last, 3 years, really. And it's like I said, I've been glued. You're glued. You get to do the trips, but then you're glued to you really got to be glued to the chair.
Yeah. You're living vicariously through your own words for a while there. You're wishing you could be out there adventuring again, but you got to get it on the page. I'm definitely I'm in that phase right now for the new project, and it takes some discipline, that's for sure. It's not always the easiest. A lot of
discipline. Yeah. Are there days where you don't get it?
Are there days?
Yeah.
Sure. There are some days. I've really tried to stick to a little bit every day has been my mantra this time around, because the first time around I had a lot of days I couldn't do it because I couldn't do it quite right. And so my new method this project has been a little bit of progress every single day of the work week at least. And so that it's just kind of, you're slowly chipping away at it. And it's always in the back of your mind. Even when you're not at the computer, you're in the shower or on a walk or something, and an idea hits you. So that's been my approach this time. And so far so good, but you ask me in 5 more months and I'll tell you whether or not it's worked or not.
Right, for sure. Well, I just, I'm very impressed with your work. And to some extent, like I was, when I was talking to you just then, I'm listening because I've been doing this forever and I still don't know really. I have never gotten to the point where I wake up at 8 o'clock or I walk in the office at 8 o'clock and I produce words until 12 o'clock. And then I go out and go fishing.
Yeah.
Or take the kids during the, I've never done that. It's always been a struggle to figure out where it starts, how to, I don't know. But it is the life we've chosen.
Man, the best thing that has ever happened in my writing life might be some of the best advice we could give anyone when it comes to trying to tackle some of these issues we're talking about, which has been that I have given myself permission to just do a little something, even if it's not very good, even if it's not perfect, even if it's not going to be the best book in the world. This is not the best sentence. This is not the best paragraph. It's just a little something. But I did something, and I gave myself permission to just do a little bit of something, even though it's not great. And by doing that, it gets the ball rolling. And if I can just give myself permission to write a few shitty words and not feel bad about that, it usually leads to me writing a bunch of okay words, which then maybe someday I can turn into some pages worth of good words. And I think that might be a little bit of the trick to making a difference when it comes to stewarding our public lands and standing up for wild places. It's, you know what? You can do a little something today. It might not fix it all, but you could sign that petition today. Or maybe next week, you could call your representative or your senator. And that's not going to fix it all. And maybe you don't come across super eloquently on the phone. Maybe you're not the best speaker, whatever it is. But do the little bit you can today. Because all of this stuff, little bit by little bit, one crappy paragraph at a time, you write a book, or you stand up for your public lands, or you save the damn world.
That is so, you're dead on, man. I'm glad I know you. One thing, when you finished that, I was thinking about the real death, the doom, right, is to think that if I think about the book, all of a sudden, and you think about like saving the public lands, or daunting, or oh my Lord, like is there going to be any fishing in 2025? You go, I don't know. The answer to that is to do small, actionable, quantifiable, and observable things today.
Yes.
And do them while you're thinking about it.
Yep.
And then if the rest of the day goes to hell, you did that.
Yep. You had a win.
Yeah. What's that?
You had a win.
You had a win, a small victory.
Yep.
But yeah, I think that's right. It's like, and that's so much of our conservation world has gotten to be this like abstract thing. Oh no, like the garbage jar in the ocean or something. You go, ah, no, what am I gonna do? Yeah. Well, the answer is you're not gonna do anything about that today.
Yeah.
You know, maybe you go over to the tap and drink a glass of water instead of buying a plastic bottle.
Yeah. Yeah. Do every little tiny thing we can is a starting point. It's a next step. It's progress, because perfect, the attempt to reach perfection leads to a lot of paralysis. Leads to never starting, leads to never doing anything. And yeah, we got to fight that temptation. We gotta rally.
Don't you think there's a terrible human tendency to go like to go to the macrocosm immediately and go, well, there's nothing I can do about that. Oh, and that lets you off the hook.
Yep.
And then you just like go grab the Coke and the Funyuns and kick back and watch another YouTube, you know?
I think there's a lot of people that have fallen into that trap.
Myself.
Yeah.
Totally.
All of us at times,
I work against that trap like all the time. I remember back when I was into jiu-jitsu for like 20 years, you know, and still am, but I've aged out of like doing it too hard as I want to. But people would come to class, you know, and they would be all excited. And they're going, I'm going to be a blue belt in 3 months, you know, or I'm going to win the Butte, you know, intramurals like by Christmas. And those are the people who never came back to class.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the people who go like, wow, man, that's a really interesting move. Show me that again. And then they would go up the next night and the next night, you know? And it was very much what we're talking about.
Yeah.
The people who wanted to be great now were the ones who ended up not coming back.
Yep. What's one small step you can take? How can you get 1% better tomorrow? How can you make some small tangible difference this week? I think.
Have you got one that you could think of right now, like on the public lands thing? I think it would be to tell your friends about the Supreme Court decision this morning.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
I think so. I think pass along the fact that, hey, this is a thing that reared its ugly head again, and we're fortunate that it got shot down. But hey, I think for me, the overwhelming takeaway from this conversation and from just kind of the moment is that it's time to re-engage. I think that there's been a little bit of sitting back on our laurels the last handful of years. It kind of felt like we won the battle there for a moment. And I think it's time to rally. It's time to re-engage, start really paying attention again, because like you said, if we don't engage, if we don't stand up on this stuff, there's folks that have other incentives and other goals in mind that are very motivated and in the right positions to do so.
They are very motivated. And at the moment, if you don't challenge it, if you don't stand up for what you want, those people are definitely ascendant at the moment. I mean, like the right-wing think tanks like Heritage Foundation they have been ALEC, American Legislative Exchange Council, American Lands Council, ALC. These people have been deeply involved in the long-term movement to take away the American public lands from as long as I can, my adult life. And these are think tanks that are mostly, you know, they call themselves conservative. It's not conservative to take away the American public lands. Let me tell you that.
Yeah.
It's about as radical an idea divesting the people of their own land as I've ever heard. But the planks of these think tanks, I'm doing air quotes, they think best when somebody's giving them money to cherry pick information and prove something that they want.
Yeah.
But that they already want to get. But they are ascendant at the moment. And it is our job as American citizens and people who know what is at stake to say no to the worst impulses And even if we voted for these folks,
especially if we voted,
say no to
especially if we voted for these
them,
folks,
right?
Yeah.
I mean, you didn't vote to divest yourself of your hunting ground.
And I think that makes us that much more influential and powerful in our ability to influence change, because we can call these folks up and say, hey, buddy, I voted for you.
I voted for you.
Right. I support this, this, and this, but on this one, you got it wrong. And if you want my support the next time around, or for your buddy who's running the next time, or whatever it is, you got to change this. I'm on your team. We're on your team. We want to support you, but this is a deal breaker. And we have the ear of these people. They might not listen at all to the left side of the aisle, but they will listen to us. So we have a huge opportunity there.
I think that's true. You got to be careful that they're taking us for granted at this moment. And the elections and stuff have kind of given people, the politicians, a complacent view of what we'll stand for. Really, I mean, that privatizing of public lands deal was in the Republican platform in 2016.
Yep, I remember.
And everybody I know still voted, and I don't know what they thought. Right, like Ryan Zinke in Montana actually did not support that.
Yep.
Whatever you think of Representative Zinke, he didn't support that, and that was really good. I thought that was courageous of him to make that stand.
Yeah.
So I think let's have more of that.
Yeah. I think that's the rallying cry. I think for us leaving here today is get ready to re-engage, get ready to stand up, get ready to be that squeaky wheel, and not be complacent. So, Hal, I don't know when it will be, but whenever your book comes out next year, you have a guaranteed appointment here on the Wired Hunt podcast to talk all about your book. I'll be recommending every one of our listeners to pick up a copy. I can't wait to read it myself. And I thank you for everything you've shared with us here today, and all the wisdom and inspiration over the years. Thank you, Hal.
It was a great time, man. I've told you I was I feel like you're the voice of your particular generation at this moment on this subject, and you're coming straight out of the hunting world, which is you couldn't have a stronger base.
Yeah,
I mean, hunter conservationists is a large part of why we have what we have.
We got a hell of a legacy that we got to hold up.
Yeah. Well, thanks, dude.
Thank you, Hal.
Yeah.
And that's going to do it for us today. Appreciate you joining me here on the Wired to Hunt podcast. Thanks for tuning in here as Hal and I discuss what is the beginning, I think, of an important set of conversations that we are going to be continuing this year and over the next handful of years, because we are going to have some work to do. And I believe and I trust that you're going to be joining me in doing that work. So thanks for being here. Thanks for checking out That Wild Country. If you have not already read that book that I wrote a handful of years ago, it is the perfect way to get you up to speed on what's happening now and what we might need to be preparing for in the future. So thank you. Appreciate you being a part of this community. And until next time, stay wired to hunt.